we'll start here in a second.
All right.
Do you guys see a red light on this? Do we know if this is recording?
It's not a light though. It's just like a stutter. It's alright. Something.
Is this as soon as that
Hey everybody. Thank you for making out. We are Winterion Game Studios, and this is Go Westwood, a studio retrospective. So a little bit about us first. My name is Daniel Greenberg. I am a professor of computer game design at George Mason University, where I teach game design and history, and I'm also the founder of WGS.
My name is Richard. I go by Horses Online. I'm an MMO burnout, one of the many, JRPG fanatic, and I got hooked up with these guys a long time ago, and I just haven't found an opportunity to run yet.
My name's Alex. I go by GalaxQuest on Twitter. I work at Bethesda during the day, and at night I'm an actor. I sing and dance and do shows.
My name's Matt. Go by Mauser Hux on Twitter, and I am a Battle Royale burnout. And yeah, you'll find me on Twitter complaining about the state of the game industry, or on Twitch, never streaming. So yeah.
My name is Erin. I go by Cherry Bomb on Twitter. I play action adventure games. Don't really do too much. Do art sometimes. I sleep. Generally a basic NPC. That's about it. I'm Momo. I go by Flower Mound. I am a park naturalist up in Northern Virginia. I'm very bad at video games, so I kind of play whatever I don't lose immediately at, which is not a lot. So yeah, so I play a lot of visual novels.
And with that, let's take you back in time briefly to Las Vegas in the early 80s.
Alright. So if we set the scene, can you guys hear me? Ish, kinda. So this microphone hates me, and we're fighting against all the gamers in the back there, so bear with us. We appreciate y'all being here. Quick head count before we get started. This is not an active studio still, so we're attracting one of two people. Those who don't know are nostalgia goblins. How many people have heard of Westwood Studios before?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. How many have played like a lot of the games from the Century games? That guy's my guy right there. That's also my guy right there. I love it. So the studio began back 1984, thereabouts, in Las Vegas. Now this is a time when home computing was just starting to kind of become a commercially available thing, but a lot of it was still being made for developers or enthusiasts, and the people that kind of had the time and the money to burn. It wasn't really something for your kids to do their one-page essays on quite yet, but it was getting there. So I mean, this is the time when your popular computers were like the Tandy 1000, the Commodore 64, the old Apple II, if you were around with that one. Now the games at the time, the popular ones, you're thinking about Gauntlet or Elite or Mule, right? Ultima. These were the big titles at the time, and that was sort of the market that Westwood was kind of coming on to sort of take on for themselves and see if they could do it better, which in some cases I would say they did. Now, this is also a time when marketing for games was not the strongest. It wasn't, there weren't a lot of TV ads. It was mostly done word of mouth, or this is a time when you would still go to your local game store and some guy behind the counter would have picked up Lands of Lore and said, "Oh, this game is so cool, you gotta check it out." And that's kind of really how it all got started. It was between that and then bulletin board systems, which I don't know about you guys. Hearing BBS takes me back to a sepia tone time of my life.
Yeah, it's definitely, you're talking about games still being sold in like Ziploc bags in stores, distribution on, floppies. So it was a very new time for this market. And the guys that stepped into this market are Louis Castle and Brett Sperry. So Louis works at a game store in Vegas, and Brett is a regular customer, and they get into talking about development in his garage / workspace in 85. And they begin by doing ports. So their earliest projects are making ports of existing games, like migrating stuff to the Commodore 64, to the Apple II, to different platforms, which means you have to be kind of savvy in a couple different languages, you have to be able to do different forms of assembly. So it required skill, and a lot of the guys early on were these enthusiasts who were really talented programmers, who were really talented at working with low-level art, low-level design, in a way that they could make these games work on different platforms. They found Westwood Associates in 85. Westwood Associates is named for Westwood, which is a neighborhood in the Los Angeles area. They were in Vegas, but they kind of liked the vibe of this SoCal neighborhood, and it sort of represented this young professionalism that they wanted to exude in the company. And Associates was because they weren't sure if they were going to be able to make it in games. So it's a nice generic name, so they end up having to do like business class software, or they're doing work on something in the entertainment sphere other than games. They're not committing to saying we're Westwood Games. They kind of went with a more generic company name. Their original office was really small. It was like a 750 square foot setup that they got, and it was a very small staff that they worked with initially.
So Westwood Associates, they had a small core team. A lot of them were friends that they were used to working with on the previous projects, reporting jobs, and they hired a little bit because they would get a new project, they would hire a little bit, they would get another project and hire a little bit. And their operating philosophy was to hire artists, they would hire musicians, they would hire people who were artists of their craft, and then they would train them how to use computers. So they, because that was back in the time where there wasn't degrees on computer science or game design, so they would hire people who were like real artists and people who were really good creators, and then they would train them on the computer stuff because that's easy. And that really paid off. So during this time, a lot of their prolific employees came on, such as composer Frank Plattney, the programmer Michael Legg, and artist Rick Parks. Westwood Associates primarily worked on licensed IP during this time, so they worked on the Nightmare on Elm Street game, Disney titles such as Mickey's Runaway Zoo, another Disney game, which was like Donald Duck, and he was like flying alphabet chase. Yeah, he was kidnapping alphabet letters. And then most notably, Eye of the Beholder, which is a D&D game.
So, in 1992, Virgin Interactive Entertainment, also known as Virgin Games, acquired Westwood for roughly $5 million and took over publishing duties. Westwood continued to function as an independent developer, but they rebranded themselves as Westwood Studios. While they had grown somewhat, the team was still small overall, roughly 4 dozen employees in total. Their philosophy of hiring talent and cultivating it was paying off though, as the team gained a reputation for delivering high-quality games without missing release windows, which, what a concept, right? They also moved into a venue better suited for a top-tier developer, a 50,000 square foot building in Vegas with room not only for game development, but also cinematics with fully green screen filming space and a dedicated motion capture setup. The company is best known for its games that were released around this time, including Dune 2, Lion King, and Command & Conquer, but we'll talk about those more in a little bit here.
As you can see here on the left, that you have an example of like this green screen studio. So the floor, the walls, they had this huge film space set up, Once they had that tech, you really start to see in the games in this era more and more integration of actors and FMV in their titles.
So only 6 years later, Electronic Arts came around and they did what Electronic Arts does best and purchased the studio, Westwood. And it started out really well. It was a $122 million deal, kind of a big deal. Purchased Westwood outright. And with that, they kind of had more of a hands-on approach to the games as their publisher. And you start seeing a lot of the more popular games. You got Command & Conquer 2, Command & Conquer Red Alert 2. You had their RPG Nox. You had Emperor Battle for Dune. And they did really well. They did a little too well, though. And again, EA being EA, they got even more hands-on. And they started being a little more draconian with their release title, with their release dates, trying to push out as many games as they could in a shorter time frame as possible, as publishers are wont to do. And they also started cutting staff to reduce overhead, increase profits. And by 2003, they just released their flop MMORPG Earth and Beyond. Didn't do well. Didn't hold the player base, and by that point, even more employees were let go. They took the remaining Westwood employees, consolidated them into their LA office, rebranded as EA LA, and they didn't make any games since. For the most part, they had a couple of releases. They did the Command & Conquer remasters, which were phenomenal. But aside from that, there wasn't a whole lot of activity after the EA buyout.
Alright, so Louis Castle stuck around with EA just a little bit longer. He worked with Steven Spielberg on Boom Blocks before he left EA to explore other positions in the industry. As of 2003, he's a senior VP of product development at Deviation Games in Santa Monica, California. Fred Sperry expanded into other ventures. He worked in property investment, development, art installations, photography, building design. He also founded a new game studio in Las Vegas named Jet Set, which developed mobile games such as Highborn. He is now primarily working on art installations and privately consulting on games. Some of the senior programmers from Westwood, such as Michael Legg, Steve Hall, and Joe Boston, went on to found Petroglyph Games in Las Vegas. A number of the old guards still local, including composer Frank Kopacki, developed a number of game titles over the years, including Star Wars, Empire of War, and the 8-Bit Army series. So with that...
And we mentioned the Command & Conquer remaster. Petroglyph was brought in to work on that. EA did not drive the remaster. They brought the old guys in to develop that. And that was huge. We'll kind of get into that a little when we talk about Command & Conquer the series. That made a huge difference in that remaster. But yeah, let's check out a little about Westwood.
It starts.
let's start where Westwood Studios starts. Dune 2, otherwise known as the grandfather of the real-time strategy game. This comes out in 1992. They have a history of working on licensed IP, so these guys are really practiced, they know what they're doing, and they're able to secure the rights to the game. They had done previous work as Westwood Associates with a number of strategy titles, but one thing they know from the strategy genre is it was all turn-based. It was like Avalon Hill style games, recreations of tabletop war games, and they really wanted to try to make this exciting real-time version of a strategy title. So they take this is specifically the 1984 movie license that they've got, and they produce a game version of this. It portrays the Battle of Arrakis. There's 3 houses you can play as. You can play as House Ordos, House Atreides, or House Harkonnen. Each one is slightly different. Harkonnen has some heavy hitters and slower. The House Ordos has some stealth units. There's a funny issue here with development, licensed IP being what it is. Cryo Interactive is making a Dune game while Westwood Studios is making their Dune game. Cryo is supposed to quit. Like, the licensors are like, okay, stop, like, we don't want your game after all. Cryo doesn't get the messages, churns through and finishes the game and releases it anyway. So the guys at Westwood were like, now what do? They just released a game called Dune, and it's a totally different game from ours. So they just named theirs Dune 2. So there is no Dune 1 RTS if you're ever going looking for it. There's, we'll be Dune 2, that's fine, whatever. The game has a lot of the conventions that kind of set the mold for real-time strategy games, unit management, buildings, some of the later stuff they've created later RTSs, which we'll get into. But this was really the game that set the ground rules for what a real-time strategy is. They made a partial remake of it in with Dune 2000. That was released in 1998. It added online multiplayer, it added some updated sound and graphics. Frank Lepacki's compositions for Dune 2000 are amazing. They still remain some of his favorite work. And there were a lot of quality of life improvements to the gameplay, because things like hotkeying, selecting multiple units, like lots of the group type stuff, was not in Dune 2. That would come with later games, and then obviously because of those quality of life things, and as important as actions per minute is to the genre, anything you can do to improve APM for players or make it easier for them to select units, select buildings, and kind of iterate through that is big for them. So they add that to Dune 2000. Sadly, neither Dune 2 nor Dune 2000 are available right now on any digital platform to acquire. Obviously, there are ways to acquire them. We won't go into details on that, but they are out there somewhere if you really care hard enough. The show floor! I'm sure this is Too Many Games. Surely someone out there has a copy of Dune 2 or Dune 2000. Go digging around, and if they don't, demand them to carry more big box PC titles.
Yes, please.
They're out there somewhere. You really gotta hunt. There was also a Genesis version of Dune 2 released in '94. I'm a big mouse and keyboard guy when it comes to that genre specifically, but if you can't find it on PC, you might be able to dig up a copy for Genesis.
The Legend of Kyrandia, or what Fables and Fiends.
Fables and Fiends, yeah.
So Kyrandia is one of my favorite point-and-click adventure game series. It's loosely based off of the Kyrandia Worlds of Power BBS text adventures, and it's a 3-part series with 3 unique protagonists and their quests within this fantasy world. The games were showcased for some of Westwood's greatest staff members, including Rick Parks, the artist, composer Frank Lepacki, and the writer-producer Rick Gush. So they were Westwood's biggest step into creating a distinctive world, and it paid off, selling over 250,000 units by the mid-90s. And what was distinctive about this point-and-click series versus the other ones that were being made at the time at Sierra or LucasArts, with Sierra and LucasArts, with LucasArts you had a command bank of verbs, talk to blank or pick up blank. With Sierra you had to right-click and that would alternate between what you could do with your cursor. With Kyrandia, you had a smart cursor that you could pick an object and use it, and the computer would know what you wanted to do with it. So if you picked up an apple and you put it on your person, you would eat it, because that's what you would obviously do with an apple. Now, you may not want to do that because that could soft lock you because you couldn't pick up another apple.
The first game had some soft locks.
But that was an interesting development choice that they did. That they weren't just using the style of other adventure game genres at the time, that they kind of made their own way of doing that. And along with that, the UI system that they used was different with every game. So in the first game, you're playing a character that has an amulet and it has 4 spells in it that you acquire throughout the course of the game, and that's how you pass the spells, by using this amulet. In the second game, you have a little camping cauldron in your, you can see it here with your spell book. You have a little camping cauldron in your inventory that you can use to make potions. And in the third game, you're playing Mount the Majester, and he has a little lying meter. So you can get through certain obstacles by lying or being nice to somebody. And you can play the game differently based on how you choose to use these meters. So it was interesting how they developed the UI, because it was completely different than other companies. So Legend of Kyrandia, you can play this now. I recommend it. I play it every year. They can be played on GOG. I also
Yeah, so this is one that we played the first one for the channel, and we will jump in and play these like all the time, just on a whim for a couple hours. They don't take, once you know the games, point clicks, you know, they don't take too long to go through. So this is a comfort food game for both of us.
Yeah, but like I said, there's a lot of different ways to play it, especially the second and third game. You can choose to get somebody to cry by feeding them an onion or tickling them. So it's an interesting, cute game. I recommend playing 2, 1, and 3.
Yeah. And one last thing, this is a trilogy, but in the vein of Westwood being a licensed IP company, this was originally actually based on Kyrandia Worlds of Power, which was a bulletin board game. It was a BBS that they worked on trying to secure the rights to, and so they developed this kind of a different take on it. The first game, you can tell, is a little loosely based on a BBS, the way the grid is laid out, like a lot of the things in that game, like gems lying on the floor. There's references to the BBS throughout the first game, but by the second game is pretty much Westwood has created their own spin on everything. Yeah, Rick, you can tell Rick has gone from writing the dialogue in the first game to like directing the second and third games, because it really, his comedic stylings take over big time.
They also hold up though. They're all still, like, by modern standards, fun games to play. Just be warned, when you go to the first one, the game itself is totally fine, but Brandon is kind of the worst. It only gets better from there.
It blows my mind that the same guy who's Kane in Command & Conquer, like Mr. Tough Cool Guy, does the voice of Brandon.
Yeah, like the most meaningful thing Brandon says is, "I don't wanna." Alright, so moving on, I mentioned this before. So Lands of Lore, it's sort of built upon the framework left behind that they had from the D&D games that they worked on as Westwood Associates. And then the original series spanned 3 titles from 1992 to 1999.
So the series features thoughtful mechanic decisions, like for example, in Throne of Chaos, the first game, you can use spells and even rocks and such to solve puzzles. While in Guardians of Destiny, the second game, it uses the main character, Luther's shape-shifting curse as a way to design maps and challenges with form-based solutions. I will mention, the game, especially the first one, it is not a joke. It is so hard.
No, it's brutal. You can put it on easy and you will still get absolutely
Excuse me, it's called Wimpy mode.
Yeah, she's right. Yeah, the 3 difficulty settings were what? Wimpy, normal, and then like
intense. I don't know.
Furious or something.
I didn't even want to
like
look
that.
at it.
It's not the easy, medium, hard that we're all used to.
Yeah. I ran in there with my boy Michael, expecting combat to go well on Wimpy mode. I ran in there, was surrounded by 4 enemies, dropped my bees on the ground. I didn't even get to use them. And I got killed. Like 5 seconds.
Yeah, it was quite a thing to see. And the first game especially was really kind of strange, because the whole thing was built upon this sort of like 4-directional maze RPG. You're going through, you encounter a thing, you fight it, you keep exploring the dungeon. It's a dungeon crawler. Kind of like Arcana on the SNES, one of my favorite games. But really, the first game especially, was a point-and-click adventure by another name. Like, it's a lot of pixel hunting, it's a lot of puzzle solving, and if you don't follow a guide, you will be stuck for hours in the easiest of dungeons. And there's one level, I don't think we're going to have time to get to it today, but there's one level that is one of the most BS things I think I've ever seen in a game. Anyone who's played Legend of Lore, the White Tower?
White Tower, yeah.
Yeah. Awful. Just was not balanced.
We don't have time to get into that though.
But I could. So let's talk about more more meaningful things to the history of it. So the first game, we're talking about presentation. The first game was almost entirely lovingly crafted pixel art. It is some of the most beautiful art you will ever have seen from the time, and it's from a time where you have to like sculpt each individual frame. Like these aren't models; like you have to create each frame, and there are reactions to being hit, to being told something, to saying something, you know, to walking into a different room. It is really, really personal, and so it played similar to the games we made before, but the second and third game, they sort of switched up. They start bringing in actors, and they start going full CG with it. And it has, instead of being this 2D, four-directional maze, it's now an open, not open world in the sense that we know it of today, but a lot more open than it was. It's not corridors that you turn left or right at. There's actual like omnidirectional movement. And rather than using a party, they took it down to one player, which was only to their benefit. It was way too busy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you've ever played the old, like, Eye of the Beholder and just the SSI, like, D&D games, or if you played the first Lands of Lore, you have a UI for multiple characters in your party, and you have to click the attack or the spell, and then the level of the spell for each person that you want to have command do something, and this is all real time, so the enemy's attacking you. So you really have to develop the strategy of getting comfortable using the numpad to back up a little bit, make the enemy come into you. That also means you have to kind of visually know where you are, not to back yourself into a corner, be comfortable with like the maze that you're traversing in. There really is a high skill cap to these games. The second and third ones are a little more forgiving. But the Lands of Lore series is definitely like, it's not the most accessible thing that Westwood produced.
It was very claustrophobic and get clumsy fingers too. It was a lot. It was also the first time they used 3D sound in the second game when it transferred over to the 3D like FMV. It was the first time they used 3D sound too. Pretty interesting. The games also featured strong acting and voiceover performances, including Patrick Stewart, who portrayed the King Richard in the first game, as well as plenty of other detailed characters and scenes, which integrated FMV performances in the 3D games.
It's the second time Sir Patrick Stewart has played a King Richard. So if you are curious to play these games, they can be found on GOG. They have to be run through the DOS box that comes with that launcher, and some of that can be a little finicky to get it to work right. The good news is there are a lot of people across the ages on the internet who had trouble getting it to work, and there are a lot of answers out there for you now to find what solution works best for you. So it might take a few minutes of getting it set up, but it can be done, and it's worth the effort.
Yeah, they're definitely worth it.
Yeah, so both Kyrandia and Lands of Lore, GOG has them. They don't take too much to figure out, but if you need to work with them, the forums there are great for getting those last steps to get it running on your machine.
Alright, and now we have Lion King. So Lion King is one of Westwood's best-selling games, I believe.
Yeah.
So it was a platformer for the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and it's based off of the Lion King movie. They were actually developed side by side, so as they were working on the movie, they were also working on the games. So because of this, there are some levels in the game that didn't make it into the movie, like the level where you are fighting a golden gorilla, and if you're playing the game, you're gonna go, where is this golden gorilla in the movie? And it was just a cut scene that somehow made it to the game, but not the movie. There's also no Nala in the game at all. No mention of her, she's nowhere, which I think is a crime. So the gameplay kind of follows the themes of Simba from the movie. So as you're the young Simba, you're platforming, you're roaring at the animals, and you're jumping on the hyenas and trying to outsmart everything and kind of work through levels, whereas when you grow up, you're using combat and you're attacking enemies and you're fighting enemies to try to make it through the levels, which is an interesting kind of development that you see without any dialogue at all. So the game was a huge commercial success. It sold millions of copies, and it was ported to a number of other consoles as well. The best of which I say is the Game Boy's port, which gave us some beautiful art. definitely the best art I've ever seen on a Game Boy. So the game is notorious for its high difficulty. Can I get a show of hands of who played Lion King growing up? Who beat Lion King? Are you serious?
Let's go.
This goes. Oh, but it does not count. No, it does. Oh, okay.
Oh, he clutched it. You
Just
clutched
barely.
it.
If
We
we had
played-
swag, we would give it to you.
We played with cheats and we still didn't beat it. And we spent an hour and a half on that game.
It's one of those, like, you want to talk about how hard something is, you really have to kind of commit to trying it, playing it, going through the iterations just to see how difficult it was. And this is the channel that launched with Ninja Gaiden 1, so, you know, we're willing to put ourselves through some pretty heinous, like, decisions in order to do that.
But what she's willing to put me through some pretty
I'm willing to
heinous
put
decisions.
Richard through some pretty heinous
Yeah.
decisions. So yeah, it's definitely a high difficulty game.
It's very high difficulty, and that decision was made by Disney. First level can make it through fine. Second level, I'd never seen the third level before. Never seen the third level. The second level, Disney had a policy where their games couldn't be too easy, that if you rented the game, you could beat it in one sitting. So they had to make the game more difficult so that you would have to go out and buy the game and they would sell more copies. Lewis Castle actually confirmed this, that the increased difficulty because of Disney's policy was a last-minute decision that was thrown in there, which is why there's so many different, what's the word?
Puzzles.
There's so many different puzzles that you would never guess. There's so many different button combos you have to do to get to the game that don't make sense to me still. Though it's difficult, the game can still be mastered. The current speedrun record is 12 minutes, and I want to cry. So the Lion King can still be played today. You can purchase it as part of the Disney Classics game collection for the Switch and the PS4. This game was a very traumatic game for me growing up, so I don't want to look at it anymore.
And then obviously, because this is TooManyGames, you can still find this on Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and then the ports are actually fairly respectable. The Game Boy and Game Gear. The Game Gear does let Nala make an appearance in the right before the end credits.
Just for a second.
And the Game Boy one does something cool. The wildebeest chase goes from being them coming at you, because that was a little too technically difficult. The handhelds go with the top down, and you're moving like left and right to dodge stuff. It's arguably a lot more fun. Yeah.
Cool. So if Dune was the grandfather of the RTS, I feel like Command and Conquer is kind of like the refining of that, the formula that they had. Like Dan mentioned earlier, now they took the existing formula, they took the existing engine, which was named Command and Conquer engine, and they added more features to increase APM, like you mentioned. Like you can separate units into groups, you can micromanage and multitask with your units, sending more groups into different areas independently of each other. So it really took off, and this was right around the time where the CD-ROM was kind of, it was the new big thing, and like most developers, Westwood saw the CD-ROM and said, wow, we have a lot of storage here, what are we going to do with all this storage? And the answer was megabytes and megabytes and megabytes of videos and improved audio. So they took full advantage, lots of full motion video cutscenes, fully active, and like we mentioned before, they tended to first hire people in their studio for their artistic ability, not so much as gaming. They didn't really care so much about their aptitude with computers or electronics or gaming. They just wanted to find the best artists that they could. And so it also caused them to fill out their roles accordingly. So you have people like their voiceover director, Joe Coulson, who we mentioned all before. He played the villain Kane in the full motion videos. So they're kind of doing a little bit of the multitasking and a little bit of wearing multiple hats to help out. But he had a film background, and that's why they brought him in. He wasn't necessarily a game developer when they brought him in. He knew film. He knew how to direct. He knew how to get the most out of the people he worked with, and it showed with the cutscenes that he was able to help create. So yeah, lots of cutscenes, all against a green screen. Super campy, super cheesy, the best. like we mentioned before, once EA bought them out, they started getting more and more high-profile actors. So you have people like later on in Command and Conquer Red Alert 3, I believe you got Tim Curry, who plays, you know, the enemy leader.
The best GIF on the internet.
The space, yeah, no, absolutely. If you want to see Tim Curry almost break character, look up the space cutscene on YouTube.
That was like after 10 or 11 hours of filming.
You can see it too. You can see in his face where he's like, "I'm not breaking. I'm not breaking.
It's
but I'm
not
close."
fair. He almost can't get through the line. It is one of those beautiful things.
That was the first take. They kept the first take.
I mean, you can clearly. But it was great. No, they did it really well. Yeah, it was all green screen, kind of like. I mean, it's kind of like a new kind of like a rising technology having that green screen, especially for PC games. Like you saw those in the movies a lot, like the big budget productions, but not so much video games. But
The actors would have get hired by their agents.
Oh yeah, they were
for
absolutely like, yeah,
cinematics.
take this easy gig.
They didn't know what it was. They
Right.
never played video games. They were like,
Hence Tim Curry.
Yeah, and this was, they just got this new studio. They use it for a lot of different things. They use it for Lands of Lore. There's like parts where you'll be walking through a cave and you look through a gap in the cave and see it's mostly like the 3D of the wall, but they have an FMV of an actor walking by and looking around like we're gonna find them and keep going. So they got really clever with how they integrated the FMVs into these games. Command & Conquer with things like film footage from like live reporters on the scene that would cut out to them being in a green screen because it was propaganda, but then they're literally just filming their own green screen studio that they had filmed the actual green screen thing in, you know, and then mixing that in with the 3D elements. They were really getting more and more creative with how they used their staff.
Yeah, it works really well, clearly. Honestly, personally, I'm not a big RTS guy. Like, you're dealing with micromanagement, multitasking, planning ahead. I suck at all three of those. I'm not a huge RTS guy, so when Dan asked me to play it, I was like, oh, okay. You know, the game still holds up. It's campy as hell. It is incredibly aggressively 90s. From the cutscenes, the music is just chugging riffs and lots of voice samples. It's phenomenal. God, phenomenal music. I mean, it's still revered today. But, you know, the game, it still holds up. EA continued to make games after Westwood went kaput. They still release Command & Conquer games. In fact, the first Command & Conquer game I ever played was like a little mini game on Pogo.com. You remember that?
No.
Pogo.com?
Well, I remember Pogo. I don't remember Command & Conquer.
They had like a little cheesy like side game, like Command & Conquer on your browser. But,
Oh, wow.
It sucked. But no, it's so. They kind of let it sit on the shelf for a little bit, but recently they brought back the Command & Conquer Remastered Collection, which was huge. That was what I used to play Command & Conquer to get used to the genre for this, and it's a lot of fun. The controls are still a little wonky. You might have to read a couple guides to get a feel for the strategy for the units and their interactions and whatnot. But it's fun, and it was a huge undertaking. A lot of people in the community tried to take it upon themselves to kind of modernize Command & Conquer a little bit, remaster it themselves, but they did a great job, and it was a big effort. They brought a lot of people from the old studio back to help out, like Frank Lepacki. He had to go back to his home studio just to try to find the original masters and tracks from the soundtrack. And a lot of the video cutscenes, they used AI upscaling to kind of bump those into a more legible resolution on modern TVs. So it holds up, and I would absolutely recommend it. You can get the remastered collection on PC. You can get it on Steam. Limited Run also did a physical collection. So yeah, check it out. It's still, you get Command & Conquer 1, you get Command & Conquer Red Alert 1 as well. So definitely check it out.
And the expansions for both of those games. And I will say, in an era where we're getting so many remasters, it was like a real treat to see them bring the old guard back, to really commit to, we're going to make this right. We're getting the people that were involved to make it, they understand what makes this tick. It's also one of those, oh my god, this is why we need the Video Game History Foundation moments. They did not save the raw video from any of this. It's all gone. It's all lost to time. They thought maybe they had found a lead, and they found in an old back room some tapes, and they're furiously going through these tapes. And it's tapes of the compressed, gone through the 90s computers, 144p, grainy, Sega CD, early PC video. That's what they had. And so the community actually stepped in and helped Lewis and the team restore the video to get those 4K remasters. That was a community effort between the developers and the fans of the game and the community that made those upscaled versions of the videos in the remaster.
Alrighty, so Westwood made a licensed PC CD-ROM game for Monopoly. It ran on Windows 3.1 and Windows 95. It used a really, really complex AI system that I don't quite understand still. The AI could do things like propose and reject really complex trades. Was super intelligent about how it handled its money. You could go into the programming for the AIs and kind of change how much money they kept on their hand at all times, how likely they were to buy certain properties, and it kind of goes way over my head. There were options for just about anything in the game. Everything was an option, everything was a menu. You could change what kind of cutscenes it would play, what kind of cinematics it would play. You could change anything having to do with the sound, the animation sounds, the sound effects. Everything was a menu. There was even an option for cheating. And cheating entailed when you would roll your die, you could either increase it or decrease the number by 1. There was a lot that went into it in order to save space in the game from all of the
the cutscenes.
Yes, the cutscenes. In order to kind of condense the cutscenes a little bit for going around the board, they recorded every piece going around the board the whole time, and they would kind of flip that cutscene depending on where your starting point and ending point was. So it was just one big cutscene, which is really, really interesting and a really unique way of kind of solving that issue with how little space they had to work with. The game supported 6 players. You could play locally or online. And you could play with humans or CPUs. The AIs that came with the game were all Easter eggs from different games. You had Xanthia and Malcolm from the Kyrandia games. You had Guybrush from Monkey Island. There was Fox and Dana from X-Files. So it was a really nice portmanteau.
Yeah.
Is that the word? And then Blizzard's VP of Tech credited this game for the inspiration for Battle.net, so you can thank this game for...
Say, how many people have played a game on Battle.net? Like, anyone here ever used Battle.net? Right? Yeah, you can thank Monopoly for Westwood for that. That's what inspired the guys to be like, oh wow, so you can talk on it, matchmake, find groups of people, and then play an online game, and we don't have to go through... This is the era of like services like Kali, like real early on, before we had multiplayer gaming really worked out, well before Steam decided to get into it. And so everyone was trying to feel this out, and Westwood Chat, which was built to Monopoly, was one of the great initial, like, online multiplayer over IP, all TCP IP handled, like, clean front-end interface. You don't have to worry about, like, okay, I need to know the port, I need to know the connections, or, like, even back in, like, IPX days, or when you were doing local LAN with no modem cables, whatever. It was way, way simpler than what had come before it.
It sounds almost more like inspiration for GameSpy rather than
Yeah, GameSpy Arcade, another example, like, that early era online matchmaking, yeah.
All right, so the last game we're going to talk about before we do Q&A, if you have any questions. So think about them now. Blade Runner. So Blade Runner, it took them years to develop this game, partly because they were working so closely with the film developers. They were trying to really get the film experience and put it into a game, but also create their own plot. So it's a plot that is tangential to the story of Blade Runner. So there are characters that they mention in the game that are from the movie. There are characters that you meet that are from the movie. So there are actual actors that are in the movie that you meet, like Rachel or Tyrell. So they came to Westwood Studios and they got 3D image and they got put into Blade Runner the game. They're going to be immortal. So it's a very interesting side game. So I recommend it for that point alone. It's another point-and-click game, but it also has unusual elements in that there are things in this game that are not typical. Like you can shoot. You're playing a Blade Runner, so you have a gun, and if you want to decommission somebody, if you want to shoot somebody, you have a gun. You can run around and kill giant rodents. You can run after your replicants, and that's an unusual element. Because I don't particularly like running and gunning. It's not very good in this game. There's also like a 3D analysis version. Here you can kind of see at the bottom right, where if you take a picture, you can sort of like analyze in 3D. You can like look around the object in the image. There's also a going comp test. So there are other things in this game that they kind of took liberties on. How would you play this in a video game? How would you actually operate this machine? It randomizes story elements. So every time you play Blade Runner, it's going to be a different game. So you could be a replicant. You find romantically interesting to be a replicant. There are different times that people show up in the game. There are different things that come up, like if you go to a certain place, this drink may or may not be there. So it's a game that always has replayability, which a lot of normal adventure games don't have at the time, because they almost play like a book. But this one is more interesting to kind of change that. And Blade Runner you can play now because they also did a remaster version. It's on GOG, and the remaster version comes with both the original and the new version.
So that concludes our panel. Thank you all for attending. Again, we are Winterion Game Studios. You can find us online at watch.winterion.com. If you have any questions, you can email us info@winterion.com. If you have additional questions, we'll step aside here and we'll let the next panel get set up and take over. And any questions you have from 85 to 03, we've done a lot of research on Westwood. It's going to be bouncing around in our heads for at least another week. We're happy to share it now. And again, thank you all for coming out.
Thanks, everybody.